Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to talk in detail about optionals in Java. What are optionals? Basically, optional is nothing but just a container. It's a container of which can hold value of certain type. So, for example, this one can hold value of a string. This itself is not a value. It's just a container. The value is this. Why were optional introduced? They were introduced because a lot of time when a variable didn't have value, the application used to throw null pointer exceptions. If the value is null and you try to reference it or you try to call a method on a null object, a null pointer exception was thrown. So in order to handle that, these optional were introduced in Java 8 onwards. As the name suggests, it is optional, which means it may or may not have a value, may or may not contain a non-null value. So if a value is present, there is a method inbuilt in that optional class is present, which will return true. If no value is present, the object is considered as empty. See, remember, it's not null, it's empty. And is present will return false. We're going to see all is present, is empty, all the demo in practice right below there. So optionals is primarily intended, where would you use it? As a method return type. Okay, so for example, you could have public optional. So let's say, for example, you have a transaction class. So say transaction, get all transactions. Or let's say get grocery transactions. So this one, or even better. So get transactions of type. So another good example, get transactions. Instead of being specific, get transaction of type. And what you would do is here, so let's say, for example, in here, transaction type. And then in here, in the method, you could have, say, query the database, return all transactions which are of specific this type. Now, it is quite possible that there might not be any transactions of the type. In that case, this optional is useful. All right. So that now what happens if there are no transactions? Normally, the method would have returned null, but optionals make it elegant handling non-existent values. Okay. So a variable whose type is optional should never itself be null. Okay, it should always point to an optional instance. Like there's no point in initializing the optional itself with null. So you can, I mean, there's no point in doing optional, say transaction T is equal to null. There's no point in this. Okay, so you just say it's optional dot off and give some value. So say test. I mean, this is not string, but that's why this is an error. And there is no transaction class. But this is how you would generally use optionals, like as a method return type. So that whoever calls this method, get transaction type, can check if this is present, if the transaction is there, then do certain operations or certain processing on it. Otherwise, consider it as null. So this is a very elegant way of handling non-existent values in a method. Now, with this aside, because this is going to give me compilation errors, let's see some examples of the optional methods. First of all, how do you create optional of test? Now again, this is a string. So this is a string optional. Okay. Optional also has a filter method on it. Another method is filter. Like how we saw the filter method in Java streams, optional also has a filter method. So what it does is it takes in a lambda, a comparator, what it does, or a supplier, it compares whatever the value is coming in with this. If it is true, it will assign it. Otherwise, it will not be assigned. It optional will be empty. Okay, so for example, here, filtered optional, it would be empty. What I'm doing is I'm taking a string optional, comparing it with non-test. See, the value is test. Non-test is not there. So this will be empty. So when I'm printing, string optional is empty, should print false. String is present, yes, there is a value in there, right? So you could use either one. Again, it's just opposite. Is empty, when is empty is false, is present will be true. If is present is false, is empty will be true, right? So here, see, I'm just trying to print optional got. Oh, how do you get the value from an optional? There is a get method, which will return the value if present. If present, it'll return the value. So if the value is not present, okay, then it'll throw no such element exception. So that is why before calling get, it's always advisable to check whether the value is there or if it's not empty. So now here in our case, filtered optional would be empty because the optional's value is not non-test, it is test. I mean, the value doesn't match. So this will only be filtered and assigned whose value, the condition becomes true. Okay. Another method, moving on, then we'll run it and see everything. Now these are two very important methods in optional. Make sure you get the difference correct. So we saw that there is get method and is empty, is present. If you don't want to use if empty is present, but you know that if value A doesn't exist, do this. If value A exists, do this. So filtered optional, so this is here, or else get. And there is or else and or else get. The difference between these two, or else get takes a supplier function or a lambda here, and this is executed only if the value is not present, which means it is very efficient. Here, see, some method, you're calling some method here. So if you, in absence of a value in the optional, if you want to invoke some method to do some processing, always use or else get. Because what happens is, as we're going to see in the demo, this method will be invoked only when the optional is empty. But in the case of or else, as we'll see when we run the method, this method will always be invoked, whether the optional has a value or it doesn't have a value. This will always be invoked. Okay, so which hampers the performance of the application. Now, before I go ahead, let me show you a demo till here. And then just ignore the rest of it. I can do this. All right. let me run it and show you a demo until here. So okay, here. So the first println here is empty, and we are printing the string optional. So string optional has a value. So is empty is false. So opposite of it is present is true. How do you print or how do you retrieve a value from an optional? Get, which is here. Now filtered optional was empty because the condition was false here, O dot equals. And what is O? O is string optional, right? So string optional is O, non-test. Doesn't match the condition because string optional's value is test. It'll internally call its get method and try to compare the value. So for string optional, there's nothing in it. So this will be true and this will be false. So is empty is true, is present is false. So they're always opposite of each other. Now here, important thing is here. What I'm doing is filtered optional or else get some method, string optional or else get some method. Now, in this case, this will be invoked. See, here is the method. It's just saying method called and return some method called. So filtered optional is empty in our case. So it will call some method. So see here, you see method called, and it returns some other string. So what you're saying is, if the optional is empty, return this value. So see here, some method called. That's the return value. But in case of or else, see, string optional did have a value test, but still the method was called. See here, the method which is there in the lambda, it was called. So that's why or else is inefficient to use. So always use or else get if you're doing a method call. And now here, see, you don't see this some method return because string optional, we have initialized it with the test, which is printed here. Okay, so that's the major difference. Now this was just, again, in continuation. So let me print this out to this confusion. Now here, see, filter, this will be called. Now in this case, see, this is or else get. This will not be invoked because we are using or else get. And string optional is not empty. It does have a value. So let's run it again. So let me comment all these out too, because we have already seen. So I'm just showing you is empty and this thing. So filtered, this is filtered, is empty. So when filters is empty, or else some method called, see here, method called, which is here. And it will print some method called because that was empty. Filtered optional is empty. But now see string optional, right? It is not empty. It has a value test. So you don't see again method call being printed. See, it's only once because of this. So let me even comment this out. And you will only see test. So some method call will not come. See, only test, right? And that's why or else get is optional. If it has a value, this method will not be called. But if I just change it to or else, and it's not lambda, sorry, let me let this be here. I have this. If we just do or else, this method, some method will still be called here. See, method call. That's why it is very inefficient, right? Next is flat map. The last example we're going to consider is flat map. What does flat map do? Just like the flat map in strings, flat map in optionals, combine the output of two optionals or nested optionals and make it into one optional. So see, for example, I have two optionals here, outer and inner. So what I am doing is combining the value of optional.string1 with the value of optional.string2. And this is the combined optional that you will see here. So here, see, what we are doing is outer optional.flatMap. You pass outer to inner, and you are mapping inner to outer, combining the two basically. Okay. You pass the inner, you pass the outer, you're combining the outer and the inner here. Nothing but just, these are just the strings. So what you're passing is first, this is the outer string, you're passing it to the map method of the internal operations, and then just printing out, combining and printing the value. So if you have nested optionals and you want to make it into just one, let me comment this out too so that we see just this here. See, you just see optional string 1 and optional string 2 combined. So that's flat map. So again, just like flat map, there is a map, does nothing but just takes one value, performs some operation on it, and creates a new value. So this will also return an optional only. This will also return an optional, just like how flat map and map in Java streams returns streams, which are intermediate operations, same way. Flat map and map in optional returns an optional object, right? So this was all a little brief introduction about optionals. So just a recap, what are optionals? Containers, which contain some value. Need not be string, it could be anything. You can create an optional by calling the off method optional off. There are other ways also you can create optional, but this is one of the ways. See, like here, this you're creating an optional, right? You call a filter method on the optional and it returns an optional. You create a flat map method, anything which returns that same object itself. It was mainly created or added this class to handle null pointers, or rather handle null values elegantly in the code, so that you are not surprised, oh, it's going to throw null pointer exception, and then you try and catch null pointers. So this is, you are prepared for both situations, right? Without having try catch. So here you do, there's a get method to retrieve the value of the optional. Is empty will be true, as the name suggests, if the optional does not have any value. Is present will be true if the optional has value. There are two methods, orElse get and orElse, which means if the optional is empty, do this. Otherwise, return the original value of the option. orElse get is efficient because this is invoked only in a situation where the optional is actually empty. But if you use orElse, this will always be invoked. Of course, you'll have the original value because this optional wasn't empty, but this will still be executed, which adds to the performance time. Flat map, as we discussed, combines nested optionals and make it into one level optional, okay? Just like streams. And optional.if present, just this is print value, you could do anything, okay? So this is all about optionals. I'm going to upload this code in my repository in GitHub. Feel free to comment If you have any questions, any doubts, feel free to comment. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.